Live from the Milwaukee Area Technical College and the studios of Milwaukee Public Television, the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation presents a statewide broadcast debate between the leading candidates for Wisconsin governor. And now, the president of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation, John Lobbs.
Good evening. Wisconsin's radio and television broadcasters are pleased this evening to be able to continue our public affairs broadcast tradition, sponsoring widely broadcast debates in major Wisconsin political campaigns. This evening's debate is the first to engage the two leading candidates for governor, the Democratic candidate James Doyle and the Republican candidate Scott McCallum. This evening's debate is made possible in part through generous grants from Blue Cross and Blue Shield United of Wisconsin and We Energies. And now on their behalf, Mr. Richard Abdu and Mr. Thomas Hefty.
Good evening. Blue Cross and Blue Shield and We Energies are proud to co-sponsor this evening's debate between the major candidates for governor in Wisconsin in 2002.
In the 62 years the Blue Cross has been tending to the health care needs of the people of Wisconsin, we've seen many changes in our society. Through it all, Wisconsin has had a tradition of good government that has lasted for generations.
Debates such as this help continue the strong leadership in our great state. We invite you to spend the next hour listening to the candidates and learning their positions on energy and other important issues in our state.
And then the most important step is up to you. Be sure to make your voice heard by voting on November 5th. Our future depends on it.
The format for tonight's debate will allow for the candidates to make opening statements, to respond to questions from a panel of reporters, and finally for each candidate to make a closing statement. The order of responses has been previously decided by a coin flip. Our panelists this evening include Jerry Taff, news anchor for WISN-TV Milwaukee, Kathleen Dunn, reporter for Wisconsin Public Radio and Milwaukee Public Television, and Ed Walters, news director for WHBY Radio Appleton. We will begin with 1.5-minute opening statements. Mr. McCallum?
Thank you, and I'd first like to thank the Broadcasters Association for helping to sponsor this, and those that are watching, because this is a very important process, and this is really affecting your lives and the future of the state of Wisconsin. I care very deeply about this state. I've got 3 children, and what drives me to run for office and to stand for issues is I want my children to get a great education in Wisconsin, to grow up living in this state, and end up having a very nice job in the state of Wisconsin. Make no doubt about it, there's a very clear choice as we look down the line in the state. A choice with one candidate who would eliminate spending caps, raise taxes in the state of Wisconsin, and would spend billions of dollars more, which would result in spending increases. I truly believe we need to hold the line to grow the economy in Wisconsin and to create jobs in this state. I have a vision, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in this state. As we look at what has been done, education is so important. I've made a commitment to education. Increased funding in education, a SAGE program, smaller class sizes in this state. I've had a commitment with Wisconsin as one of the leading states in health care. Doesn't mean we can't do more. We continue to push ahead to be able to address health care costs. Finally, we've got a wonderful blueprint of creating high-paying jobs to grow Wisconsin's economy. That blueprint is already starting to be implemented. There's the values I represent. I represent those every day as governor. I ask you to join me in fighting for a better Wisconsin.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle, your 1.5-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, John, Governor McCallum, panelists. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about our plans for Wisconsin. I'm running for governor because Wisconsin desperately needs a change. With a $2.8 billion deficit, our budget is a mess. The taxes you and I pay are the 3rd highest in the country. 400,000 people in this state do not have health insurance, and far too many of our kids leave Wisconsin because they can't get a good job. Fighting to help Wisconsin problems and Wisconsin families and fix these problems is what the governor's top priority should be. But Governor McCallum has taken us in a different direction. He proposed raising taxes $123 million just last year. He proposed cutting the funding to our communities to support police and firefighters. And perhaps worst of all, he spent the entire $6 billion tobacco settlement for a one-year fix in his budget, depriving us of the funds for health care, prescription drugs, and anti-tobacco programs for many years to come. I know we're not in this mess because the taxpayers of this state haven't done their fair share. New taxes are not the answer. Accounting tricks are not the answer. Phony budget revenue projections are not the answer. I'm pleased to be here tonight to talk about our vision of Wisconsin and to bring the change that we desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question will be from Jerry Taff for Mr. McCallum.
Okay, I would like to actually phrase the question, which will be followed by me with our agreement here with a question to each of you. But the first question, I think on the minds of the entire state, is of course the massive budget deficit. And there seems to be in the public perception some inconsistency about exactly what that is. So I would ask you, how much do you think the deficit is, and how are you going to fix it?
Jerry, thank you. And of course, the deficit itself is predicated on very little growth in the state of Wisconsin, and on spending continuing to go the way it has. You should know that I had the smallest increase in spending in 30 years in the budget I presented last go-around. So I've shown that we are going to be able to hold the line. I'll tell you one thing you do not do. The growth of a budget comes if you hold the line on taxes. Now, the expectations are roughly, if things were to continue, about $2.8 billion. What my opponent needs to do is his deficit is about $5.5 billion because he has added $2.7 billion of spending promises to the public in the state of Wisconsin. Specifically, I've recommended a very specific plan on growth. It's been both in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Have the plan on what we do. It would include spending reductions with government, and of course I have gone through that process. We'll continue to reduce and make government much more efficient at all levels of government. The negotiations with the tribes will result, pertaining to casinos, result in higher revenues to the state of Wisconsin. There will be some exchanges for that. And finally, Wisconsin has been below average, one of the bottom states as far as the receipt of federal funds. And already in a year of governor, I've shown that I have the ability to receive those federal funds and will continue to drive in that direction.
Mr. Doyle?
Well, Governor McCallum continues to make this attack over and over, and the newspapers that have looked at his claim that I'm raising taxes have called it ludicrous, they've called it manure, they've called it deceptive. I am not going to raise taxes. I understand that we are not in this mess because the taxpayers haven't done their fair share. In fact, under the years that Scott McCallum's been lieutenant governor and governor, our property taxes have more than doubled. We pay more than $3.7 billion more in property taxes, and we've risen to be the third highest taxing state in the country. So the surest way to predict what you'll do in the future is what you've done in the past. Despite all of the claims that Governor McCallum makes, I am the only person, the only candidate sitting here today who has never proposed raising taxes. Just 1 year ago, Scott McCallum proposed raising taxes by $123 million. In order to get out of this, to deal with this budget, we can't deal with phony revenue projections. Today, I released quite a detailed list of suggestions and areas that we can make cuts that go to $800 million to $1.2 billion. That's what the governor has to do. Instead of taking all the tobacco money and spending it for a one-time fix, if I'm governor, I'm going to have to do the hard work going agency by agency and finding the cuts that have to be made. Yes, we all hope Wisconsin is going to grow, but we're not going to get out of this problem with the kind of fanciful revenue projections that the governor is basing his plan on. We have to be hard-nosed about it, and we really have to make tough decisions.
Thank you.
If I may follow up, yes. With regard to the tobacco money, there are questions for each of you that keep coming up as well. For Mr. McCallum first, the allegation comes forward that you spent 30 cents on the dollar, bargained the money away, spent it all last year, have nothing left now to save the budget or to deal with tobacco issues. Please give us your view of that.
And that's
30 seconds.
Thank you, because there are a number of things that said were not correct. First of all, I'll point out that the tax increase was raising tuition for out-of-state students in the state of Wisconsin. Taking a spending cap off is an increase in taxes. It's very clear in the state of Wisconsin. 30 cents on the dollar is wrong. It was pointed out in the headlines in the Madison paper today. It's closer to 70 cents on the dollar, but I would ask Jim Doyle to have that ad withdrawn. It's wrong.
And Mr. Doyle, there has been some concern that when the lawsuit first came up, rather than handling it through your office, you handed it off to private attorneys and had them do that, and therefore they got some money. How do you address that?
30 seconds.
We worked very closely. My office was deeply involved. I made all of the decisions in that lawsuit, including the settlement, together with Governor Thompson for $6 billion. And Governor McCallum is just wrong in what he just said. He has committed every single future dime of our tobacco settlement to get a one-time payout to get himself out of a hole. Next year, the year after that, the year after that, the year after that, Wisconsin will be the only state in the country that will not get one dime of tobacco settlement money. It has been called by newspapers throughout the state a terrible mistake, a terrible idea.
And your time is up. The second question will be from Kathleen Dunn. For Mr. Doyle first.
Mr. Doyle first. I'd like to talk about the death of Charlie Young Jr. this week, which is a story that unfortunately has been making international headlines. And it's hard to come up with one question to take all of this in. I ask, is this primarily a law enforcement and criminal justice issue, or does it take in a whole host of other ills? If so, what are they? How would you make this neighborhood in this city and others like it all over the state better places?
Mr. Doyle.
Well, it is certainly a law enforcement problem in that first citizens of this city and state need to be protected, and people who present a danger of whatever age to harm other people must be incarcerated in ways so that they cannot do that harm. And so I certainly, I don't want to comment on a pending case because the evidence is still to come in. But clearly, I think the first priority is to make sure that people are protected and that people of whatever age who would perform these kinds of acts are securely put away where that doesn't happen. But we also understand, when I was first asked this question, when it first occurred, I said, let's just wait to see what we hear about the families and the backgrounds of these kids. And the stories of that are already coming out. A 10-year-old doesn't just drop out of the sky with violent tendencies. I've been a leader in this state in fighting to try to prevent the abuse and neglect of children. I'm proud of the 1% solution that was included in the Truth in Sentencing law that says that 1% of amount of money equal to 1% of our corrections budget should go to the prevention of abuse and neglect of children. We're the only state in the country that makes the direct connection between prevention of abuse and neglect and ultimate correction costs. So clearly it's a law enforcement problem in the sense of community safety, but it is a deeper problem of trying to assure that our children are growing up with good values, growing up not exposed to violence early in life, growing up in a way that they would not commit this kind of act.
Mr. McCallum?
It wasn't too long ago that I was over at the Boys Club in Milwaukee, dealing with a number of kids and seeing the advisors, counselors working with kids, and can see the difference in having mentors, having groups, and having a value system instilled in them, which is why I have supported having a faith-based initiative, having support for boys and girls clubs throughout the state of Wisconsin. It really cuts to the core of family values. I was quite chagrined to see one of the parents say, well, boys will be boys, in response to a tragic occurrence. It is not acceptable. The most important aspect, though, that helps all of us in Wisconsin is a job. I just spoke to the minority business group recently, and I've said everything we're trying to do, why I've held the line on taxes, and why it's so important in this race to hold the line on taxes and not promise all the types of spending and take off spending caps, is they're so directly tied with jobs. We need to create jobs in Wisconsin. The best prevention of crime is a job, and the better thing is a better job, which is why education and economic opportunity are so important and are really the key course of where we take the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Ed Walters, addressed first to Mr. McCallum.
The fall deer hunt is just around the corner, and many hunters are fearful of chronic wasting disease. Sales of deer hunting licenses are down, and the state could lose millions of dollars as a result of CWD. What should the state do about this problem?
Ed, and thank you. As a hunter myself, I've tried to encourage others to get out and hunt. In fact, even try some new things. Bow hunting is an example. It is a very serious concern for the state of Wisconsin and for our heritage. It really cuts deeper than just tourism or hunting, which is why I've worked with the federal government. I've been able to obtain $3 million already for a center in Madison, in Wisconsin, where we'll be able to test 50,000 deer. Ideally, I'd like to see all hunters be able to test their deer, and we're working towards that. But let me say that there's only one person in the entire state that has made a political issue out of this. I was able to get legislation through very quickly in Wisconsin to help address the issue, went through the legislature in a bipartisan fashion. Our congressional delegation has worked in a bipartisan fashion. Unfortunately, my opponent is the only one who makes a political issue out of this. We will move ahead. We'll pull together as a state. Again, we've got the lab already set up, the diagnostic lab. I'm expecting federal approval on that very shortly and continuing to push ahead so that every hunter in the state can be assured that the animal they take is disease-free. And I will continue to work in that direction.
Mr. Doyle?
Well, and you're absolutely right. This is a very serious issue for the state of Wisconsin. The governor is right. It's a serious economic issue for us. If we don't have a full deer hunt, it's going to hurt many areas of Wisconsin. It's obviously going to hurt families that enjoy hunting, and it's serious in that way. It's also a public safety matter. I'm somebody who puts 50,000 miles a year on the roads of Wisconsin, and you know, it's a problem enough already with deer, but if we don't have a full deer hunt, the roads of this state are going to be very unsafe, and it's a serious agricultural problem as well if our deer herd explodes, the kind of damage that are done to our crops. Well, there are really two things that have to happen here. One is we have to be working with the scientists, the game management people to determine what the spread of the disease is and how best to eradicate it. But there's a second part of this that I've been trying to persuade the governor for a couple of months, since July, to get going on, which is to set up a private-public partnership by which the state helps with private labs in order to do individual tests for deer. I believe that unless a hunter can have confidence that the venison of the deer that he or she gets is edible, that many fewer hunters are going to hunt. And so I have been strongly urging the governor to do what has happened in other states, in which the state works with private labs to arrange for a system by which individual deer can be tested, to give each individual hunter the confidence that if they get a deer, the venison is edible.
Thank you. Jerry Taft will have the next question, and the round will start with Mr. Doyle.
Okay, I'd like to follow, if I may, on something Kathleen talked about a moment ago. And since you are, as television and radio people like to say, the top cop, most police chiefs are probably not going to like this idea at all, and perhaps that's proper, I don't know. But the sheriff, the current sheriff in Milwaukee County, has made it very clear he would like to expand the efforts of his department in other areas besides fixing flats and patrolling the freeways and those kinds of things, which have been historical. Everybody wants to be the chief, everybody wants to have his own police department, but I wonder whether there might be some value to expanding the allocation of police resources and perhaps even modifying the jurisdictions in order to better use the law enforcement capabilities which are extant in the state.
Well, you know, in many counties that actually happens, and a lot of it depends on the relationship between the sheriff and police chiefs in municipalities and how they work together and how they deploy people. And in fact, in the area of drug enforcement, and I'm in charge of the State Division of Narcotics Enforcement, we have set up task forces all over the state in which municipal police departments, sheriffs, deputies, state agents, and others, often working with federal agents as well, work very well together and work in a very coordinated fashion. I know the issue in Milwaukee is one that's going to have to get resolved between the sheriff and the chief, but I know in many communities when there are additional personnel that are needed, it is often that a local police chief will ask the sheriff's department to help out. They'll ask agents from my department to help out. You know, I'm very proud generally of the quality of law enforcement in this state and the kind of cooperation we've had. We We have really remarkable chiefs and remarkable sheriffs and great men and women who are our police officers, and I think for the most part you find very, very good cooperation among those departments in Wisconsin. And if I might say, you know, one of the other things I'm proudest about, going back to Kathleen's earlier question, is that it really has been law enforcement in this state, and I've been very proud to be a leader of it, have been the ones calling for really getting out and working with kids. The DARE program, other drug education programs, Boys and Girls Clubs, police athletic leagues. It has really been the police and sheriff's departments of this state that have done much of the great work with kids in Wisconsin.
Mr. McCallum.
We are all very proud of our law enforcement and the first responders in a number of different areas. There are mutual aid agreements where our different police departments will work together, emergency government will work together. An important aspect, though, is all of government becoming more efficient and looking at it from the perspective of working people and taxpayers and the constituents we have. And I have encouraged governments at all levels to do that, to do it with themselves. And that takes local governments talking with each other, it takes police departments talking with each other. And I would hope this will be brought about. While this is in Milwaukee County and a Milwaukee County issue, it can best be done with discussions with the different units of different police departments. And I'm hopeful they take the perspective of how can you be most efficient in providing the services to the public.
Thank you. Kathleen Dunn will have a question first for Mr. McCallum.
Well, let's take the broad umbrella of education, and I could ask about 5 questions in one, but I'll ask a brief question and then a follow-up to each of you with your special concerns. And I guess the biggest overall question is the current way we fund public education in Wisconsin okay with you, or is there a better way to fund education?
Well, Kathleen, I don't know, is that the first year 5, or are we going to follow up? But let me, okay, because we can get 5 different answers for this as well. No, let me say, I'm very proud of our education system in the state of Wisconsin. Again, with 3 children in a school system, I want our school system to be the best in the world. That ought to be what we ought to strive for. At the same time, it is unacceptable to have any school failing. It is totally unacceptable in Wisconsin. I have supported increased funding for SAGE programs, smaller class sizes in this state. I have supported our structure of 2/3 funding in Wisconsin, supported K through 4 kindergarten. So I have made education a very high priority in this state because I believe we need the skills and the knowledge to be able to grow our economy and to create jobs. So I have supported. At the same time, I want accountability with the system to make sure when we expend dollars that we know we're getting a good return for those dollars being expended. Now, I have, again, in your question in the 2/3 and the financing, I have supported it. I've tried to bring together educators and business people to look at this, but it can't be done separately. You can't have one group dictating that this is going to change, and you can't have so many losers in the system as some of the programs would have done. It needs to be done with the perspective of improving education in the state of Wisconsin. And I have worked, and I will continue to work to bring people together to push for the reforms that I've advocated.
Mr. Doyle?
Well, education is my top priority. My mother was a teacher, my wife's a teacher. I believe my kids have had the great advantage of public school education in Wisconsin. This is really at the heart of what Wisconsin is all about. And let me tell you my basic principle that I really want to focus on as we address all educational questions. And to me it is pretty simple. To me the real goal as you look at all the complicated education questions is this. Does it help make sure that we have a good, well-trained teacher in the classroom and that we have a class size that's small enough to make sure that the real magic of education takes place? And with respect to your specific question, I didn't quite understand. I guess the governor doesn't like the way we're reforming it. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I do, about the way we finance education. I believe that we need to have major reform in how we finance education. I believe we need to have a system that assures that every child, no matter what geographical area they come from, no matter what their racial, ethnic background, no matter what the economic circumstances are of their parents, are assured the one ladder of opportunity that Wisconsin has always promised, and that ladder has been a great public education system. Our current system is not working in that way anymore. Most of our districts are really hurting, and only a very few are benefiting from this current formula. It is time for major reform of the way that we finance public education.
And a quick follow-up on money. Let's look at QEO and revenue caps. I know that you, Mr. Doyle, would like to lift those. There have been questions about how we would pay for that. So let's talk about what both of your thoughts are about QEO and revenue cap, and if Wisconsin can afford to lift those.
30 seconds. Mr. Doyle first.
Well, with QEO, we certainly can't keep on going like we are, where we just drive teacher salaries down, and now we're actually below the national average. This can't be the way Wisconsin operates. Who ever thought a state that prides itself so much in public education would see its teacher salaries fall below the national average? And as far as the revenue caps, I believe that they have to be part of an overall reform of the educational system, something that I was at a forum with Governor McCallum a year ago in which he called for. We need to have a basic, complete overhaul of the system by which we finance public education.
Mr. McCallum?
And while I believe in reforms and bringing accountability to the system and support funding when we know we're getting a measurable return in education, so parents and children are high priorities in the system. Let me assure you, we cannot eliminate revenue caps and maintain two-thirds. The portion we'd forgotten, Kathleen, in that question. As we've pointed out, the bipartisan Legislative Fiscal Bureau has said with that proposal that my opponent has, average property taxes $700 higher in the state of Wisconsin. Property taxpayers can't afford that.
Thank you. Our next round of questioning will begin with Ed Walters having a question for Mr. Doyle.
The Crandon mine at the headwaters of the Wolf River in northern Wisconsin is a controversial issue. Some say the mine would create needed jobs and give a boost to that area's economy. But others say the mine would threaten the environment and tourism. What are your views on the subject, and should the state buy the property to stop the mining project?
I don't think the mine is a good idea for Wisconsin. I think that the long-term economic benefits to this state really depend on clean air and clean water and a beautiful environment, and I don't believe that the mine, as proposed, would further that. I have supported legislation that would stop certain portions of that proposal. For example, we should not be allowing cyanide, the use of cyanide in mining in Wisconsin. We should make mines have to comply with the same hazardous waste laws as we do landfills and industrial operations. With respect to buying the land, I guess I'm disappointed that the governor cut off the negotiations as quickly as he did. I was sort of waiting to see what the price would be, and I know what he said the price would be, but I guess I'm interested to hear from the other side what the price is. It really depends, of course, what the dollars are and whether or not that is a good deal. But for me personally, I do not think the mine is in the best interests of the future of Wisconsin. If I could use just a minute, in the last question, Governor McCallum indicated that somehow the Legislative Fiscal Bureau would say property taxes would go up under my plan. This was a paper that they did years ago before I ever talked about my plan, and newspapers around the state that have looked at the governor's ad about this have called it ludicrous, deceptive, manure. It is simply untrue, and just saying it over and over again doesn't make it any more true.
Thank you. Mr. McCallum, on the Crandon mine.
I will on the Crandon mine, but first of all, take it to an independent group, because it is absolutely correct, the numbers are right, and saying things like that doesn't change it. So I don't mind an independent group look at it. It's you take spending caps off, property taxes go up in Wisconsin. We have some of the toughest standards, some of the toughest laws in the environment in the state of Wisconsin, in the country, in our state. And those laws ought to be adhered to. I'm proud of having tough environmental laws, and I'm proud of my environmental record, the things that we have been able to do working in a bipartisan fashion in the state of Wisconsin. I did suggest that I would look at having the state with our environmental fund purchasing the Crandon mine property. When negotiations took place, the discussions were done, I saw the price, and I've got to say, from the perspective of Wisconsin taxpayers, and that's why I was just shocked that the Attorney General suggested I should have made that purchase. To purchase the land and mineral rights when the state is not going to run a mine is beyond what any taxpayer ought to expect to take place in the state, and furthermore would have depleted our environmental fund, the stewardship fund. So it would have hurt on all fronts. It was absolutely the wrong thing to do, and I'm going to make the right decisions for the future of the state to protect tax dollars, and if we need tougher laws, and I've supported them, we'll move ahead in that direction.
Thank you, Governor. The next question, Jerry Taff, addressed first to Mr. McCallum.
Okay, there's a crisis of confidence in politicians in Milwaukee County, which resulted in some politicians being run off and some others recalled. And now the current county executive is saying we need to either reduce the number of supervisors or cut their pay. I'd like to expand that to the state level and look at what's going on in the legislature. The State Assembly, as I understand it, is supposed to be a part-time job, yet a lot of people treat it as if it were a full-time job. One guy I looked up essentially gave himself a 50% raise with $80 a day per diems, $80 a day being about what Pizza Hut pays its drivers. So I wonder whether we need to have some kind of stronger control over what these full-time assembly members are doing.
Jerry, thank you. And of course, you've got the ultimate full control at the ballot box. I have recommended structural changes itself to the legislature and the legislative process because there can be changes made. But an important aspect, I think, as we look down this, is the government ought to belong to you, to the public, to the voters of this state. And that is why I've offered some very specific things that can return government to the people. I cite my pocketbook protection plan, which says, in effect, for any tax increase in the state of Wisconsin, the voter, those who are paying the bills, would have the right to turn that down. I believe in the public. I believe in the voters. And that is one of the difficulties we've got. When you've got people that have been in for a long time that are more concerned about power, they're more concerned about politics than getting things done, than the policy of the state. Some of the structural things can be done. I've recommended those. I've recommended some changes in the ethics area. I do believe much of this starts, Jerry, to answer your question as well, much of it starts in the course of campaigning, of being truthful with numbers. If you're going to offer $2.7 billion of spending increases, what taxes are you going to raise? That is where it starts, and it needs to be with policy and where we go as a state. That needs to be the driving factor.
Mr. Doyle?
Well, it means doing the right thing. For example, the legislative leadership in this state is paying unlawfully legal bills for themselves for those caught up in the caucus scandal. I believed they were unlawful. I need permission of the governor to go to court to stop that. Governor McCallum, for some unknown reason, it's never been really very well explained, denied the right of the Attorney General to go to court to stop the payment of those illegal fees, and they continue to be paid, and they are now approaching $1 million because he did not give the permission to go to court to stop it. It's also a question of use of state facilities. The governor a year or so ago took his family with him on a vacation to Rhode Island, and with his family and friends, and said that he paid for it. There has been a public records demand for some months now to see the check from the governor that shows that he paid for it, and I assume that he will comply with that law soon, but it is time for him to comply with the open records request and produce the check. It also calls for a change of leadership. I'm the one candidate in this race who has said that the legislative leadership that brought us the waste of the tobacco money and sham campaign finance reform that the governor signed, that everybody knew was unconstitutional and that set back the cause of campaign finance reform, that the leaders that have brought us that should step aside and let some other leaders step forward. And so I think there are real practical things that need to be done to get this state going back in the right direction.
Thank you. Follow-up, Jerry?
Please, yes, with Mr. McCallum. If I understood you correctly, you said that we should have a referendum any time there's going to be a tax increase and let the populace vote. Wouldn't that be very expensive? And isn't that why we're electing representatives in the first place?
Well,
30 seconds.
The representatives have not done a good job. The state of Colorado has this as an example and has been ranked one of the top managed states in the country. The public ought to have the right to do it. Let me answer one other thing, Jerry, as long as we're at it. The reason I did not give the Attorney General the power to go in is because I did write, as my attorney, asked him several questions. How much will it cost? What is our chance of winning the case? Why should we have tax dollars fighting other tax attorneys? You know what kind of response I got from my attorney? None. That's why I wouldn't allow them to go ahead.
Our next question will be from Kathleen Dunn, starting with Mr. Doyle.
Let's go back to the budget, okay? Because both of you have been criticized, really, for being much less than specific about what you would do to either attract new industry to Wisconsin, to build the economy, to get all of us to be making $10,000 more a year by 2 years from now. Can you be a little bit more specific here about what practical things you would do to grow Wisconsin's economy that would help out the budget crisis?
Sure, and I have a very detailed plan. I have a 63-page agenda for change. I've in many areas, including growth of the economy. It's on the website doyle2002.com. I hope people will go to it. I have tried to spell out in some detail a lot of plans in the state of Wisconsin, and clearly this is one of our most important. In the last 10 years, during the time that Governor McCallum was lieutenant governor and governor, we have seen the net loss of 100,000 graduates from the state of Wisconsin. It is an enormous problem, and we have to do a number of very important things. We really need to focus on high-end industry. The great things that Wisconsin has to sell is a great educational system and hard-working people. A lot of good work is already being done in this area, but we really need to step it up. Biotech is an area that Wisconsin should become a real leader in. At a time when we have scientists in the state of Wisconsin who are doing groundbreaking work, some of whom are, may win Nobel Prizes in the area of stem cell research. We have a state assembly that actually passed a resolution that said those scientists should go to prison for 7 years. We've got to make sure that we foster their research at the University of Wisconsin. We need to make sure that we work to apply that research to find the kinds of practical applications that can go out into the marketplace. We need to develop more entrepreneurs in Wisconsin. We need to develop a lot, and we need to attract a lot more capital here to convert those wonderful ideas, make Wisconsin a great leader of biotech.
Mr. McCallum?
I just visited a company, in fact, just this morning, and had the head of the company say he was at a convention, and they were saying, why do you continue to have a business in Wisconsin? Why don't you move to other states where the taxes are more competitive? Which is exactly why taxes and spending are the most important issue in creating jobs in Wisconsin. Now, Kathleen, you asked specifically about plans, and I'm a little bit disappointed you haven't seen Build Wisconsin, which is a very detailed plan. For the first time in Wisconsin, I now have a blueprint put together by people around the state, economic development leaders, educators, union leaders from Wisconsin, of how we grow Wisconsin's economy, of how we build. And of course, one of the steps is you can't promise, I've seen the 64 pages, I don't know if it's the same proposal that has the $2.7 billion increase in spending that Mr. Doyle is referring to, but that is why the tax picture is so important. It is directly tied with jobs. And we've started implementing Build Wisconsin. In the year and a half I've been governor, we've already created 72,000 jobs in the state of Wisconsin. Our per capita income is growing. I've set specific goals of where we want to get with our per capita income growth. We've created technology zones, and we've created clusters focusing on higher paying jobs in the state of Wisconsin. We are going to build on the strengths of this state, and we do have many strengths. Those high paying jobs will return. We now have a plan in place, and we're implementing it.
Thank you. Mr. Walters will start our next round of questioning with a question from Mr. McCallum.
Because of the state budget deficit, local municipalities are concerned about the loss of shared revenue. Mr. McCallum, earlier this year you proposed cutting shared revenue. Do you still want to do that? And if so, why and how much?
Thank you for the question. I did propose changes in the way local government and state relationships work. And in the speech very specifically that I gave, I said we need to change the face of government at all levels in the state of Wisconsin, local and state. In effect, we have too much government. And what I truly believe we need to do is change the system itself, reform the system so that it responds to working people and taxpayers, not putting more and more money into the same tired old way we've done things. I needed to move the ball down the field. Study after study for 30 years in this state has said we need to change the system. I had to take a chance. I had to shake the system up. And I don't think even Mr. Doyle can argue with the point that there's now discussions throughout the state of Wisconsin on consolidation, on becoming more efficient. From the northern part of the state, it's just in Ashland and Bayfield a few weeks back. There are discussions on emergency services being combined. Brown, Winnebago, and Outagamie County talking about their landfill systems being combined. It is becoming more efficient and consolidating, and it needs to be done at all levels of government. Now, the question specifically, will we cut more? We're moving now. The state is changing the way we've needed to change. We've needed that accountability. We need to look at things differently, and we're now looking at saving instead of spending in the state.
Mr. Doyle?
Governor, it's just not working. You proposed cutting all shared revenue to municipal governments in this state in 3 years' time, meaning that every community in this state would not receive one more dime. This, other than taking the tobacco money, is really the only plan you have ever come up with to balance the state's budget. Shared revenue is at the heart of what we do in Wisconsin. When I talk to people around the state about what they expect from government, they tell me they want good fire protection, they want good police protection, they want to make sure the road in front of their home is in good repair and that they can get in and out. They want to make sure that the park in their neighborhood is safe and that their children can play in it. They want to make sure that the school in the neighborhood is an excellent school. These are all things that are funded by a form of government other than the state. And your proposal to cut shared revenue really did scare people, because many communities saw the loss of 40% and 50% of their revenue. They saw major cuts to police and fire. And that's why there was such an enormous outcry against your proposal. Shared revenue is at the heart of what we do in Wisconsin, and as governor, my responsibility will be work closely with those people who provide those basic services, police, fire, sanitation, water, parks, and others. Work closely to make sure that those services are being provided as effectively and as efficiently as possible. But you have proposed cutting all shared revenue in the state, and I certainly disagree with that proposal.
Our next question will be from Jerry Taff, addressed first to Mr. Doyle.
We were talking earlier about the brain drain, if you will, young people getting educations and leaving the state. Well, we who are getting a little gray aren't going anywhere. We're going to stay here. So what about prescription drug coverage for senior citizens? What should the state do about that?
Well, the first thing is I hope we raise a collective voice to Congress to say that they should finally do, and the President do, what they've been promising for years, which is to give a prescription drug benefit as part of the Medicare program. It's ridiculous in this country that we have a federal drug program that does not include prescription drugs. But in the meantime, we do have to work at it. And let me say this, I'm sure the governor is going to tell us about the program that he signed, that he was kicking and screaming into, that he did not at first fund, but later did in the budget. But just imagine if he hadn't spent the tobacco money. I wish tonight we were having a discussion between Governor McCallum and I about how we spend the $175 million that we would be getting next year and the $175 million that we would be getting the year after that from the tobacco companies to help with health care in the state of Wisconsin. We could have been doing great things to help seniors with prescription drugs, as well as to help many other health care causes in this state. So it is very difficult to, after having squandered that tobacco money, I think for the governor to say that he is trying to help people with health care costs. We had the greatest opportunity of many generations to really help people with prescription drugs. Now, having said that, obviously, I believe that we should continue the program, the senior care that is in place, and if the budget permits, if we finally get this back into some order and get rid of the deficit that this governor has created, you know, I hope it's something that we may be able to put more money into.
Mr. McCallum, on the question of prescription drugs for seniors.
Yes, Jerry, you have a long ways to go, and you better stay in the state of Wisconsin, because we're going to get better and better as we move along. But I've got a mother-in-law with Alzheimer's, and I can see very directly the cost of prescription drugs on our credit card bill each month. Our greatest generation is now reaching the age where these are important issues. I am very proud of the prescription drug bill in the state of Wisconsin. And no, we shouldn't be waiting for the federal government to take action. We can be a laboratory of experiment. This state has had a long reputation of being able to move ahead and do good things and to push ahead as an example for other states. And I'm going to continue that reputation. We have in the prescription drugs where we've got one of the best programs in the entire country. 177,000 seniors are going to be covered by the prescription drug law. And those that are watching that have not signed up, I encourage you to do so because it's designed to help you. But I'm not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to continue to push ahead in this state. We're going to continue to address health care costs. Right now, in fact, I've got a program we're looking at where I again expect federal recognition, other states to recognize how we are pushing ahead and doing an admirable job. Let me say one point, because Attorney General seems to be the tobacco securitization that they paid $77 million for the other attorneys to do. The real key is, which other taxes would you raise? Because we need the jobs and the people in the state of Wisconsin, and raising taxes was not the solution.
Our next question will be from Kathleen Dunn, starting first with Mr. McCallum.
Actually, this question comes from a listener, and it's a little bit different, but I think it makes you more human. So I'm going to ask it. The ability to admit mistakes and to learn from them is an important characteristic in a leader. We all make mistakes, but not everyone learns from them. What's one mistake you've made in the course of your professional career, and what have you learned from it?
Well, the most important aspect to me, Kathleen, and that's a tough question, because I've got to say, as I've gone through life, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I would hope to learn from all of them. The important aspect to me, though, are not a lot of the little things. It's where we go as a state, the big picture. It's also, if you want to learn about others as a person, to me, it's the type of person you are, what motivates you. And as I look inside, I try to say, what good can we see? What good can we create? And I'll be honest, even sharing ahead of time this evening, you know, I had some little thoughts, and I thought, no, I've got to see good in Jim Doyle, and I hope he does. I hope he does well this evening. That the public can really see that the truth will come out. So that's an internal struggle, to answer your question, that I have ongoing on a daily basis.
Mr. Doyle.
Well, I don't doubt the governor's goodwill, and we've actually been friends and played basketball for many years together, and I appreciate that he is at least trying to think charitably about me tonight. You know, I was elected district attorney of Dane County as a very young man. I was 30 years old. I think I was the youngest district attorney at the time that in Dane County history, and I had to learn a lot in a hurry, and I suppose there were a lot of mistakes I made. I had to learn to be a lot more patient. I had to learn how to make good decisions, not snap decisions. I had to learn how to deal with pressure. And maybe most of all, I had to learn how to really keep my eyes open and realize that maybe I don't have all the answers, that other people, if my mind is open and my eyes and ears are open, that I will find from other people answers that are better than the ones that I may have thought up. And I think that over the years I have developed and done that better. I hope I have. It's something as governor that I really do understand. This is not a job where one person goes off into an office and dreams up big thoughts. It's one where you really have to harness all the great ideas and potential and skills of the people of the state of Wisconsin, and really making sure I have an open mind and am open to new ideas is something that I work on every day, and I hope I will if I'm fortunate enough to be elected governor.
Mr. Walters, the next round of questioning for Mr. Doyle.
In these tough economic times, the private sector has had to learn to do more with less. Specifically, what can the state do to streamline government to make it more cost-effective?
Well, there are a lot of things that can be done, and you know, I've taken a good deal of heat in this campaign for having proposed that I believe that over the next 8 years, if I'm fortunate enough to be governor, that we should have as a goal trying to reduce the size of state government by 10,000 people or so, and I think you do it in a variety of ways. You don't create new state departments, as the governor did with the Department of Electronic Government, new cabinet secretaries, and so on. You try to collapse the state bureaucracy. You try to make sure that the state government is much more service-directed, that it's much more technologically driven, that you really get to the people who are doing these jobs and make sure that you're listening to them about how they can be done and how they can be done better. We also have to really focus on where the big increases are in state government and how we try to bring those down. Certainly a goal for all of us should be to reduce the number of people in our correction system and have lesser costs going into corrections. We don't do it by opening up the back door of the jail and letting people out who have well earned their way into those prisons, but we do it by some of the things we've talked about earlier of focusing on young people and trying to really make sure that we keep them from going into prison in the first place. We've got to focus on medical costs. Our state has not been nearly as aggressive or effective as many other states in going into the marketplace with larger buying pools to really drive down medical costs of the state. So there's a lot that has to be done, and clearly downsizing state government is a very important priority.
Mr. McCallum.
Of course, I've gone through the process, and believe me, in a year and a half as governor, I have shaken up the system. It's not easy to say we're going to change the growth patterns that we have traditionally seen in Wisconsin. I'd introduced the lowest spending increase in 30 years in our budget. And as you know, I went through a lot of screaming and a lot of hand-wringing, but it had to be done. Reduced, these aren't promises. I've already reduced through attrition and through some layoffs, 1,200 state employees. So we are making those changes. And let me say, I find it intriguing to say that we need to have technology and at the same breath say we need to eliminate the Department of E-Government, Mr. Doyle, because what I am doing is consolidating in state government as well. We're pulling people from different technology, they're IT people, technology people in all different departments, not able to speak with each other. I've pulled those into one agency. I've consolidated at no extra cost. No extra cost. And in fact, that's one of the ways we look down the line of becoming more efficient and saving money. We've already saved $18 million with a goal of $50 million within the next several years. It's this type of consolidation and responding to the customer that needs to be done. Now, even beyond that, the budget that I'm putting together next time around changes the whole process. It's no longer going to be put together in the traditional means. It's being put together with benchmarks and specific goals.
Thank you, gentlemen. That concludes the question and answer portion of our debate. Each candidate will now have the opportunity to make a 1.5-minute closing statement. Mr. McCallum?
Again, thank you, and those viewers that are still with us, thank you for joining us, because this is an important part of the process. And I've said as much as it is an honor to be called governor, I happen to have the title, but it's really all of us. It's you, it's everyone that has a stake in the direction we take as a state. And you do need to become involved. We are at a crossroads. This is a very serious and a very important time coming up with two distinct economic philosophies. I truly believe we need to hold the line on taxes. And I've gone through 2 budgets where I've had to fight off hundreds of millions of dollars of increased spending. Had to fight that off from the legislature. I've vetoed a record amount of funding, $64 million in the budget. I've gone through those tough battles and have held the line, and I've stuck to the principles, the values of the people of this state. I've outlined those from day one. Education, striving to have the best education system in the world. Healthcare and prescription drugs and taking care of the needy in Wisconsin. I was able to protect that. And again, having specific goals and a specific plan of creating jobs, of growing our economy, of providing the opportunity. Because the fact is, without a growing economy, without those jobs, we never are able to afford our education system, our health care system. Those are the values that I represent. Those are the values I take with me every day as governor. I ask you to join me in fighting for a better Wisconsin.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle, your 1.5-minute closing statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lobbs, and Governor McCallum and panelists, thank you for giving us this opportunity. Wisconsin is badly in need of change. Governor McCallum has just said that he has stuck with basic Wisconsin principles in how he has led this government. I don't think so. He has violated sort of every basic principle that we hold dear in this state as far as how we handle our money. Instead, we believe that you shouldn't spend more money than you take in, and yet he has created a budget that has led us to a $2.8 billion deficit. We believe in saving money when times are good, like they were in the 90s, saving money for an economic downturn, and yet they spent hundreds of millions of dollars of a surplus and had only $45 in the rainy day fund when we needed it in the harder times. And we don't believe in mortgaging our future in order to just get us through an election, spending the entire tobacco settlement so that Wisconsin's the one state in the country that will not get a dime of tobacco next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now was contrary to the basic common sense principles of how Wisconsin operates. If I'm governor, we are going to focus on the real priorities of this state. We're not going to raise taxes. The governor can keep saying this over and over and over again, but we are not going to raise taxes. In fact, I am the only candidate here tonight who has never proposed a tax increase. Governor McCallum proposed a $123 million tax increase just last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate between gubernatorial candidates James Doyle and Scott McCallum. This debate has been sponsored by the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation through generous grants from Blue Cross and Blue Shield United of Wisconsin and We Energies. We thank the candidates, James Doyle and Scott McCallum, for their participation. And we thank our panelists, Jerry Taff, WISN-TV Milwaukee, Kathleen Dunn, Wisconsin Public Radio and Milwaukee Public Television, and Ed Walters, WHBY Radio, Appleton. Over 40 Wisconsin radio and television stations have broadcast this debate